Taiwan Semiconductor climbing after topping fourth quarter estimates, profit rising 57% from a year earlier on strong demand for AI chips. Joining us now, we've got Matt Bryson, who's the Wedbush Securities Managing Director of Equity Research for Hardware. Great to have you here with us, Matt. Let's break this down a little bit more. The Taiwanese chip maker issued an upbeat outlook for 2025. Do you see the momentum continuing even as we focus in on some of the year-over-year, and how much of the emphasis should we start to be placing on the sequential?
Yeah, so I think that Taiwan Semi is in a good place, not just for 2025, but 2026, 2027, and beyond. A lot of that has to do with them being the only supplier of these advanced semiconductors, right? They went from being competitive with Samsung or Intel to effectively being in a monopolistic position. In terms of year over year versus sequential, there's always room for some lumpiness. So I'd be less focused on, say, Q1 or Q2 and more focused on their outlook for the year. Having said that, when they give you Q1 guidance, they pretty much know exactly what their number is going to be. Because wafers take 3 months to come out of the fab, so they have their orders in hand, and so it's a pretty good indicator for where advanced semis are for this quarter.
Matt, does this tell you that maybe these U.S. chip curbs aren't that big of a deal for TSMC, just given the guidance, given the robustness that they are expected to see, and given what you just said, the transparency, and maybe how confident they likely are in 2025, given the numbers we got out this morning?
Yeah, from on the U.S. chip curb side, like if you're talking about shipments to China being curtailed a bit, it sounds like between them getting licenses to supply to companies that aren't viewed as a threat by the U.S., and then other companies within China being a relatively small portion of their revenue, right? There's no Apple or Nvidia who are 10% customers coming out of China. I think that it's just not that much of an impact. If you're thinking about, say, potential U.S. tariffs, there's no other choice. So if there's a tariff or some sort of legislation or regulation that favors U.S. chip makers, again, no one is competing with TSM at these advanced nodes. So whether you have to pay more doesn't matter.
What is the likelihood that we could see a new competitor finally emerge and be able to not just break ground, as we've seen in some instances, but then get into full factory operation to the point where there is a dent in Taiwan Semi, and then there's perhaps a little bit more of the spreading of the chip production and the wafer fabrication elsewhere?
Yeah, over time, it's definitely a reality. Look, we've seen Intel. They were a near monopoly for 2 decades. You can look at Samsung on the memory side. They were the leader for 2 decades. Those are companies that are now struggling. There's always going to be innovation. At some point, your execution always slips. And so, yes, at some point, I fully expect that there will be someone competing with Taiwan Semi. At the same time, if I'm a customer looking at choosing Taiwan Semi, Samsung, the new company out of Japan, Rapidus, I want to see them execute on a process before I shift to them, right? Otherwise, there's a ton of risk because you don't know if they're going to get that process right. And so, at this point, Taiwan Semi is talking about 2 nanometer. They are going to control that node. And so you're talking 3-4 years out where someone has to prove that they can do it at 2 nanometer. So when you get beyond 2 nanometer, then whether it's a Broadcom, whether it's Nvidia, whether it's Qualcomm, they'll be confident in switching to that other alternative because that company's done it before.